This is the April Planning and Zoning meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And Adrian, if you would take attendance, please.
Mr. Hogan.
Here.
Mr. Bush.
Here.
Mr. Kerrigan.
Here.
Mr. Driver.
Here.
Mr. Masters. Ms. Metcalf.
Here.
And Ms. Lindsay.
Here.
Great. Good representation today, as always. Thank everybody for coming, and we're pretty informal here. If you have anything you'd like to say, we'd absolutely encourage your comments at the right time, and that's what we want to do is hear from our citizens. Before we get started, I would like to recognize Jim Bush's service for the last 2 years as chairman of our group. He led us through the comp plan and the LDR, among other things. And I just want to thank him for his fine service and hope that we can match that and continue on with enforcing and using the rules that we've put together as a result of that. Thank you, Jim.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, first thing we have is a replat request for 512 Highway 98. And do we have anybody representing that group?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm Margaret McKinnon. I'm representing the Banners. Some years ago, I sold them a unit, and it was a triplex. It has since disappeared because of the hurricane. They have, in the interim, bought all of the units themselves, and they would like to rebuild on the same land, same size, a duplex rather than a triplex. Same footprint. No other changes there.
Okay, so do we have a map in here of
Yes, you have.
what the proposed redo is?
Yes, it's.
Not what originally was here, but
Now this is what it was, and it was 3 units, now they just want to make it 2 units, same footprint.
okay.
So here's another piece
Yeah, we don't have
So it was 3, and they just want to make it 2.
Are they gonna conjoin, are they gonna join?
Yeah, it's one building.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought. I was wondering.
Yeah, it's been that way. It was a cream color building. You've been by it a million times, between, I think, 6th and 7th or something like that.
So you're technically building back on the same slab that was there
Yeah.
before.
Same
Rather than have 3 units, you're asking for 2
Two.
units. So you're reducing the density,
Mm-hmm,
and that's pretty much it,
yeah.
leaving everything else the same.
Mhm. And the more specs, if you want more specs, they've got everything listed,
Okay.
flats, whatever.
And it was zoned before,
It was the residential,
Low density.
low density?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
been there for quite Sherry McDowell, they built those units back in quite a few years ago, so they've been in that area for a while.
Does anybody else, public, have any input before we ask the board for their input? Okay, anybody in the board have anything to say?
I just think that it makes perfect sense to me. We've been worried about density all along, and here we're reducing it with a piece of property, and I think that's smart, and I would approve it.
Okay, anybody else?
Agreed.
Okay. I think it's important to recognize too that per the regulations that we did, they're building back on the same footprint, which is important because otherwise it wouldn't meet setbacks and different things like that we have in place today, so.
As well as city staff reviews these and makes a recommendation, and they have here.
Recommended, okay. All right. Anybody wanna make a motion?
I'll make a motion
Okay, Jack.
that we allow the property owners to divide their lots and sell half to each of the 2 bordering townhomes. thereby reducing the triplex into a duplex.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Is that a good motion there? Okay, so I second it.
Okay. You ready, Adrian, or still writing?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Mr. Hogan?
Yes.
Mr. Bush?
Yes.
Mr. Kerrigan?
Yes.
Mr. Driver?
Yes.
Ms. Metcalf?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all in advance, so thank you all.
Okay. Next on the agenda, we have a lot split request for 508 Oleander. Is anybody here representing the
That's me.
group? Okay. You want to tell us what's happening?
We just had a duplex, but, she's, I think, wanting the lot divided so we can put, I don't even know if the lot is big enough to put two houses on, but I think that's what she wants.
Okay, so in our pack, do we have the size of the? Okay. Is that the 25
Yeah.
by 150?
Yeah.
Okay, which, it's zoned low residential, right?
Yeah, there's one house in front of me, Bill Stevenson's. He's the only house left out of the front. Well, he's passed, so Charlotte Stevenson's the owner of the house.
So 43,560 is the number of square feet in an acre. That means the lots would need to be 7,260 each for them. And it looks like these are about half that. So they're about 3,750, so they don't meet the minimum lot size based on the density.
I really don't even know about that. I mean, I don't know. I know there's not really anybody there, all the houses are gone.
Right. So the way the current regulations are is the property could be built back on the existing slab as it was, or like the one before with less density. But to take the property, which I understand to be, once divided, only 3,750 square
Yeah,
feet, it doesn't meet.
Yeah, it's 100 foot, but I think only 50 foot deep, maybe.
Right.
The lot guy behind me's got the same size lot, I think.
Right, well, each one would be 25 wide by 150 according to what I'm looking at, if that's the right one, which it looks like it is. So we're about 3,000 square feet short of having a lot big enough to do it. I think the problem, anyway, even if you did do this, you couldn't meet the setbacks
Yeah, maybe
of
not.
7.5 feet, 20 feet, and 10 feet in the back. There wouldn't be
Yeah.
much left there at all to build on, so.
Well, I kind of thought that, it wouldn't really. I told her, I said, I don't think it's big enough. You know, the lots that go from Fortner to Oleander they're 100 foot long, but they're 50 foot wide.
Mhm.
Mine was 100 by 50, I guess.
Okay. Does anybody else have any comments? Jim?
It's non-conforming and, after we after the city failed to allow all the other non-conforming lots to be grandfathered in, if we go back and start issuing, approval for people to come in with non-conforming lot splits, then we're gonna be right back where we started.
Right. Okay. Anybody else?
I'd like to say something.
Sure.
The issue for me is the lot split itself. While this appears not to meet a lot of the requirements, if we got into the lot split, as we have attempted to so many times over the past years, we would be setting the precedent of allowing all these other lot splits that come in. And we've argued this for the past 15 years. Lot splits are a major problem because most of the lot splits that come in are people who are wanting to take the large platted lots and start slicing them up, whereas those of us who moved into those neighborhoods with those large platted lots, we bought them for that specific reason. So this would set a terrible precedent for lot splits.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else on the board or the public have anything to say? Do we have a motion?
Make a motion that we recommend the city council not approve the lot split request for 508 Oleander.
Okay,
I second it.
okay. Adrian, when you're ready, you can call the roll.
Mr. Hogan,
No,
Mr. Bush,
Yes?
Mr. Kerrigan,
Yes.
Mr. Driver,
Yes.
Ms. Metcalf.
Yes.
Mr. Hogan, was that yes or no?
I'm sorry, yes.
Can you reread? Yeah, okay.
Say he made a
He
motion.
said-
I wanna make sure.
No, I wasn't going to approve it.
You seconded,
Yes,
so
I
we knew what you
seconded
meant. Okay. All right. Miscellaneous, stormwater water ordinance. Nice light reading.
Okay. Wanted to introduce myself first because I don't know all of you, but I'm Dina with Dewberry, so I'm your city engineer.
The famous Dina, who's been recognized on numerous occasions for working extremely hard, and we appreciate that.
Thank you. If it's okay, what I'll do is just run through the kind of the overall changes from the existing LDR with regards to our stormwater, and then we can get into the weeds if you guys have questions. So the first portion, 4.06.01, the intent, that is basically the same as the old LDR.
You know, do we have any of those in writing? I know we got an email, but do we
Did
have
it come out
any?
in the packet?
It's on the last
Okay,
pages. You,
okay, I didn't get that far.
Very last.
Got it, go ahead, sorry.
Okay. Under general requirements, that first item A, the purpose of that is to address proper, like, single-family residential lots that are developed. This will ensure that you have to grade your lot to a permanent city drainage structure, so that your stormwater has a place to go and it can be collected citywide. But the second part of this is we've had issues in the past where a property owner will discharge stormwater onto an adjacent property before it reaches a city drainage structure, whether it be a ditch or the street or an inlet. And so if that is the case, the problem we run into is later, if that property owner develops their property and fills whatever drainage conveyance the adjacent property owner put in, now the stormwater has no way to get from point A to B. So this second part would require, if you're going to cross another property before reaching a city drainage structure, you would have to get an easement from that property owner that then passes on with the property that allows that stormwater to continue to flow across that property.
So is a street a stormwater drainage?
Yes, we are considering streets because most of our streets have ditches.
Okay,
So that is considered a way to get your stormwater off your site. So this requirement, the first part of that requirement was there, but this second portion is new regarding obtaining an easement or permission.
so what the intent is to go into the, is this an comp plan? And replace what's in there with this?
I don't think it's a change to the comp plan. I think it's more guidance in the LDR to follow the comp plan.
More specific?
yeah, it's replacing
Okay.
what's in the LDR with what's written here.
Okay.
So the next item, item B, this was in the previous LDR, the bulk of it was there. However, the LDR was referencing an old Florida Administrative Code 1725, which is no longer the current code. So this updates that to the current state requirements for stormwater. And what this essentially is saying is, if you are not exempt by the state from requiring a stormwater management facility, then you need to install one. So the gist of it was there, but the rule reference has changed.
So who would be exempt?
So the state exempts single-family residential lots. If you're doing more than a single-family residential lot, then the state requirements kick in, And anything under 4,000 square feet of parking or driving areas and 9,000 square feet of buildings, anything under those thresholds are exempt. But anything above those square footages would require a stormwater management facility per the state requirements.
If you look at the Florida code, there's a list like that of people that have to do it. And it doesn't list who's exempted, it just says everybody that has to do it, and it's like a page and a half long.
So all our PUDs would have to do it?
Yes.
Yes, any large development, well, over 400 square feet or something like that.
4,000 square feet.
4,000 square feet.
Yeah.
So any development, that's probably the baseline. Because if you look at, it just lists a whole bunch of stuff, and basically it's larger development.
So what about an existing facility that's gonna rebuild on the same site? Like a Gulf Foods, for example?
Yeah, the state's gonna kick in and require that as well, if you're exceeding those thresholds. So this is to bring us concurrent with the state requirements. So if the state's saying you have to do it and get a stormwater permit and stormwater management facility, the city is gonna require that you do that as well. Now, the difference is, previously this section of the LDR was a little bit gray, and it implied that was the case, but it was also implying that any single-family residential lot also had to do stormwater attenuation, which is just not feasible.
Too expensive.
Right. And space-wise, it's not typical that a lot in Mexico Beach has enough space to put in a stormwater detention pond. So we wanted to clarify, if you're exempt by the state, you're exempt from the city from having to do a stormwater management facility. If you're not exempt, then you have to
So
follow.
like a lot of our other regulations, we're using the state building code, for example, as
Mhm.
guidelines. Same
Well,
thing on this.
yeah, we're
Is
using
what
the state
we're trying to go to.
Exactly.
Okay? Thank you.
The next one, general criteria, water quality, this was in the LDR previously, however, we were referencing the state code partially, but not fully with stormwater quality. I can get into the details, but essentially we referenced 1 inch of runoff, but there's a second part to that that is 1 inch of rainfall over the property, whichever is greatest. So we're trying to reconcile that difference and just refer to the state's Northwest Florida Water Management District's requirements for stormwater quality. So if in item B, you're not exempt, then under 4.0603 water quality, you have to meet the state standard. Then the next item, B, water quantity. This also applies if you're not exempt, whereas before, that was the gray area. Not every single family residential lot will have to meet this requirement. This item B, water quantity, will only apply if you're not exempt from the state for stormwater management, as in you have to create a stormwater detention facility. But we're going to differ from the state and follow our previous LDR, which is a more stringent standard. This is dealing with not water quality, but the amount of water leaving, so quantity of water and runoff. And so this will use the previous LDR and require the 25-year, 24-hour storm event, which is what was in there previously, and this is more strict than the state standard. However, we're still going to reference the state standard for the actual construction and design of meeting that event. So the state has requirements on how you design your stormwater facility in order to meet a 25-year, 24-hour, including the rainfall IDF curves that you use. So we're referencing the state for how it's implemented, but we're requiring the 25-year, 24-hour.
And what would the state regulation be
The state
compared to that?
The state actually for attenuation has much larger thresholds. You do have, if you have a certain percentage of impervious area, then you sometimes have to do the 2-year, 24-hour for erosion. But the 25-year, 24-hour doesn't kick in until you're a larger, much larger, I think it's 12 acres or more of development. So we're being more stringent and addressing smaller projects, which most of our projects probably aren't that big. So this is trying to make sure that our quantity of runoff is addressed on the smaller items that, or smaller projects that could slip through the crack from the state.
So it seems like this is a potential, although it's been on the books,
It is.
as a challenge for new development or replacing existing development.
I don't think so, because it has been the rule. It was in the LDR previously. Now, grandfathered properties, that's where I could see maybe a challenge, because if you were already, like a Gulf Foods, already there, you probably predate the LDR and the state requirement. Now, when you rebuild, you are gonna be required to meet the state. And then this 25-year, 24-hour rule would apply.
And how do you meet this requirement?
So again, you're gonna be required by the state to do something. This will require that you do some sort of on-site detention, so that whatever runoff was leaving your property before you developed it, in terms of the quantity, is going to match post. So after you develop it, you hold your water long enough that you release it slowly and match what was there before, so that you don't flood someone next to you. And the way that you can do that is a small detention pond, or you can even use, under parking lots, there's a type of system that you can, it's essentially chambers, and it catches the water through inlets, takes it under the parking lot to these chambers, and allows it to percolate down into the groundwater. So there's multiple ways you could do it.
And what would the square footage be, again, that people would have to meet this requirement?
If you were over 4,000 square feet of parking area and 9,000 square feet of building space. And that actually can be combined, so you're allowed 9,000 square feet building plus 4,000 square feet parking together before you trip it.
So you could you change those ratios around?
You're not allowed to change the ratios.
Okay.
You're stuck with the 9,000, 4,000, but you can combine them. So if you had a 9,000 square foot building, you're also allowed 4,000 square feet of parking before you trip the threshold.
So if I had 9,000 square feet of building and not 4,000 square feet of parking, I wouldn't be required to do this.
Right.
I'd be required to meet the other state requirements, but not the Mexico Beach increased
Yeah.
state
Well,
requirement.
you wouldn't be required by the state to do a stormwater pond either,
A stormwater,
like a stormwater management facility. If you were that scenario, you wouldn't be required to do state or Mexico Beach. You would be exempt.
because you're under
Yeah.
square footage, okay?
Mhm.
I guess what I'm thinking is we need to redevelop what we've lost.
Mhm.
And as we go through different things, I in particular always looking at,
What's
we
the-
don't wanna make it so difficult that we don't end up with anything.
Right.
It's a good time to fix anything that's substantially wrong,
Mhm.
but at the same time, it costs money to get these things going, so,
Right.
okay.
The next requirement was also in the previous LDR, simply stating that if you have to do stormwater management, you're required to provide a certified professional engineer's calculations of your design. The next one again was also in the previous LDR regarding, this is really, item D is to address erosion and sedimentation into adjacent waterways, which is something the state requires. But what we wanted to add here is, we want to have the option for, Public Works reviews and the building department reviews our plans when they're turned in for development. And in some cases, depending on where they are, like if they're next to a wetland area, we want to have the ability to request an erosion and sediment plan to show how they will address that and prevent erosion and sedimentation into adjacent waterways. So that's really the change there, is that last sentence that allows us to require that if we deem appropriate. Item E is pretty much the same as previously, and the gist of that statement is to, because we are so flat, we have found that using ditches and open drainage instead of closed pipes seems to make the whole system citywide work better. So that's really what that's stating is, if possible, use a ditch, not a pipe, to enclose your on-site drainage. And then this item F was a part of the comp plan changes, but we wanted to add it here as well, so that it's visible in the LDR. This is regarding non-flood zone, unshaded zone X. The lowest finished floor of any structure would be 12 inches above the center line of the road.
Mhm.
Dina, let me ask you something that you had just said. You said that you had determined, or not you, but the city has determined that using open ditches works better for the city. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, so within everyone's property, is adjacent to a city street, which typically has a ditch. And so we've found that it's easier to maintain and keep track of the right of way if it's an open ditch. I mean, obviously you have a pipe where your driveway crosses, but if someone goes in and encloses that whole section of ditch along their parcel with a pipe, that becomes a maintenance nightmare for the city. It's easy to clog, and if you don't get your grades just right, it won't drain, whereas the ditches, it's a little more fuel proof.
So this runs directly opposite of what the city has been doing, because they've been trying to close most of the ditches.
I think so like the Maryland ditch being closed, I think it depends on where we are. I think along the city streets, the intent is to not enclose. You have to have a pipe where your driveway crosses, but in general, along the city streets, it's easier to maintain ditches, like the 15th Street ditch project. And it's not set in stone, it's just we're saying to the maximum extent possible, we prefer that this be this way.
Does this include when people landscape over the city right of way and cover all the way out to the street? Would that be included in part of this? Because that has been a major problem, I know.
Yeah, if you're filling a city ditch along the street, that's gonna create a problem. Maybe not for you, but for someone else.
Right,
Yeah.
so is the city going to be looking at stopping people from doing that?
So I know on the front end, we've been a lot more aggressive in looking at site plans and addressing the stormwater and how they plan to get it off their property, and then once it leaves where it's going. That's through the building department and also through public works. As far as enforcement, if that happens after the fact, I know as well, we have a code enforcement officer now, full-time, that is trying to keep up with those things. So yeah, the intent would be to maintain that, and
Okay,
anyone.
Good.
yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, and then item G, this is also out of the previous LDR, essentially saying, stormwater management facilities should be located in a place that's easy to maintain and operate, so that they continue to function. Item H is new, and the purpose of this is if your development, we have some big developments potentially coming, such as St. Joe. If your development is large enough that it needs to be phased, you have two options for phasing it. You either have to, in every phase of development, put your stormwater management facilities, so if you have 3 phases, you have 3 separate stormwater management facilities. That's to ensure that if you do phase 1 and then 2 years later you do phase 3, you're addressing stormwater. The other option is to do a regional stormwater management facility for all phases of development, but we're going to require that you install that in the first phase. So you can't wait till phase 3 to put in your stormwater if you've already developed phase 1 and 2, because you're not doing what you need to do as far as treatment.
You might not do 3, so.
Yeah, so that's really the gist of that. That is new. And violations is the same as previously.
I'm confused, thank you very much. I had one question on I,
Yes.
the last sentence. Should the not be in there? It's not, we say this is what has to be done, and then it says a building instructor without documentation of elevation of the lowest floor, other required design certificates, so you don't have everything you need, or other evidence compliance required by this building code is presumed not to be in violation. It should be in violation,
I
right?
believe so.
Presumed
Okay.
to
I'll mark
be.
that.
All right,
Yes.
now it makes sense.
Any other typos or?
Jim, you read
I've
it?
got some questions.
Okay.
And what I'm addressing here, some of them, I don't have a problem with the plan. I'm concerned with how it's gonna be administered, okay? So, first off, I didn't know what a stormwater retention facility was, and I had to look it up, okay? Elsewhere in the LDR, we've got definitions, so I guess that begs the question, do we need defining it? Because I had no idea. all the stuff that was included in what's considered a retention facility.
Right.
Because to me, facility means kind of like a building.
Plan.
Yeah.
So the reason we use stormwater management facility instead of specifically saying a pond is because there are different options for doing that, whether it be under the parking lot.
Swales, all
kitchen.
kinds of things. But
Exactly.
that's why I'm asking, if nobody knows what you're talking about.
Right. We could add definitions. That being said, under B, when we talk about water quality and water quantity, the state handbook that we referenced, Northwest Florida Water Management Resource Applicants Handbook Volume 2, spells out what is an acceptable stormwater management facility and what it needs to do. And if you do a pond, these are your design requirements. If you do a wet pond, these are your design requirements.
So my question would be then, are the people that are concerned with this, do they know what a stormwater facility is? And if they know what it is, then we don't need a definition.
I think along the same lines, just to piggyback on that, a lot of what we're getting is single-family residences being rebuilt or duplexes, whatever. It would be nice if somebody was going through to say that those are exempted,
Mm-hmm.
rather than, refer them to FAC. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to get that.
Okay.
So,
So explain.
if you were gonna build a house, you could look down there and say, oh, okay, we're exempt.
We
Move
could
on.
include the exemption, that specific one that or the thresholds maybe, include that
Right.
in item B.
That would be helpful.
And as far as the stormwater management facility, we could spell out what we consider appropriate facilities, or we could rely on the state environmental handbook. I think if you are residential, you don't care. If you're above that, you're going to have an engineered design, you're gonna have a plan. So once you get that person on board, whoever it be, they should know.
Yeah, one of the things when we
State
redid the comp plan, we tried to eliminate definitions because they can be found elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is a lot more detailed than the comp plan. That's why I was asking about whether we needed it or not.
Should we could maybe point to the environmental handbook and say those are acceptable, if it's in there, they're acceptable stormwater.
Yeah,
management
as defined in the state,
As defined. Okay,
whatever.
all right.
Okay, under paragraph B. Okay, who's going to ensure that the stormwater management facility is installed? Who in the city?
So it will first go through the plan review before a permit's issued.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it looks like all is in order, and it depends on how big it is. I mean, I think everything requires a development order if it's not residential, correct? So you're gonna have the staff review, then it'll have to come before P and Z, go before the council, and then on the back end, in order to get any sort of,
So nobody can
Final.
sneak it in without doing
you know,
it. Okay, I like the change you've made to C. However, I don't think the rest of that paragraph should be eliminated because I think it adds necessary information.
under the general criteria.
Yeah, and I would just say, do your rewrite and then add what's currently in C underneath that.
Okay,
Because I think that adds a lot of information as to what you're looking for.
okay.
But I don't know, I'd like to get somebody else's comment on that. That's just to me.
Do you have that in front of you, is what the other
The
information
old C
says?
is, it's on page 102 in your LDR. The proposed stormwater management system shall be designed to accommodate the stormwater that originates within the development and stormwater that flows onto or across the development from adjacent lands. The stormwater system shall not be required to attenuate or treat off-site flows, but must convey the off-site flows downstream. I mean, to me, that's all kinds of information that you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yep, we'll add that back in.
Number F, okay, I understand that's, where it's coming from, but the first sentence makes absolutely no sense at all to me. Elevation of the lowest finished floor of any new structure must be a minimum of 12 inches above the crown of the adjacent street, providing access of 12 inches above the curb. What?
I'll go back to the comp plan because I know we had that in the comp plan as well. and see how we wrote that.
And then whichever is greater after that even adds more confusion.
So that, what it's trying to say is. If
I know what it's trying to say,
Okay.
but it's just,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's written.
it's out there somewhere.
Yeah,
And I guess the same thing applies to all the other, who's responsible for doing what to whom. But the last thing is violations, okay? We've already said, without getting the certificate, then you're assumed to be in violation. But what's the penalty for a violation? And who's going to ensure that the penalty is administered or whatever?
I don't have an answer for that. But good
Hence the
question.
question.
We
It's an
can,
angry.
Hence the question.
yeah.
Same as any other violence. Nothing.
No, angry.
I mean, see, that's a problem with what's been in the past, there's been all kinds of people in violation, and nobody's in charge of making sure that they, are in concurrence, and that's one of the things I'm really concerned about.
I would assume the violation be treated the same way as violations throughout the LDR and the code enforcement process through hearings, fines.
Assumptions, you know what they are, right?
Yeah, but that would be what I assume.
So we can add some,
Well, I just think, we need to
Shall
take,
be
somebody
enforced by the
responsible
city.
somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, name the position or
By
whatever.
the city code enforcement process.
Yeah, that's fine,
Mhm.
as long as somebody's responsible to fix it. And that was all the comments I had.
That wasn't bad, I thought it was gonna be bad.
yeah.
And this goes to be bad, I said, just Tanya doesn't have people saying something, wrong, or whatever.
I'd like to say something,
Absolutely.
because, not everybody knows my background, but I've worked with many different municipalities, and stormwater is such a big issue everywhere. When my husband and I came to Mexico Beach, we were in a 3-year battle when someone built next door, and all of their runoff came right over onto our property. It was frustrating, we couldn't get anybody with the city, this was before your time. We couldn't get anybody to help us, this is a huge issue, especially in Florida, because we are so flat, and we have really, really important things to deal with here. And understanding how dirty and nasty stormwater is, having tested it for 30 years or more, I shudder when I see kids stomp in mud puddles, because it's nasty and dirty, and we need to really have some strong stormwater control.
Are you
Things out
comfortable
there,
with
so-
what we've?
Yeah, I am,
Okay.
but again, when we looked at what was in place then, when we built the house, it should have been addressed, but we had, city people, the city manager, and all kinds of people come out, nobody did a thing. We built a wall ourselves between our property and the neighbor,
Keep it
because
on
we
their
couldn't
property.
get anybody to help us, and we didn't want that stuff on our land, so I applaud the city for doing this, and hope that enforcement is strong.
Yeah, to
Because
reinforce
it's
what she's saying, that's still happening. There's a brand new house on 15th on the west side that they brought so much dirt in, when they completed bringing the dirt in, it was about 6 feet higher than every other house around it. So the city came in and made them take some out. Well, it's still 3 feet higher than every other house around it. And that water's gonna come down there. So I still don't think we're looking at that stuff.
Well, I agree, and I've spoken with the folks in Lynn Haven, and for years, they had the same thing that we had, you gotta be so far above and so everybody that comes in, the last house built is the only one that's not being flooded. And, if you don't address it and you don't take care of it, then, you've got the last house built and everybody else is flooded. So it's really important. It's something that is easy to overlook, but it's really important for the long term. So I applaud your efforts to make that happen.
Is there any more teeth you think we need in what you've got written there, or?
No, I think this combined with, because the changes we made to the floodplain ordinance regarding not putting fill in a wetland or a floodplain within the 100-year floodplain, I think combined with this will do a lot, and that floodplain ordinance applies to single-family residential lots. So I think it's both. It's the runoff generated, if you're higher than everyone, the runoff generated has to go somewhere, and that's what this is trying to do, is if it's gonna not be caught by city structure, you need to address that before it goes onto someone else's property. But then that combined with not using fill to elevate houses in the floodplain will also help eliminate
I
some.
think we have a regulation that says you can't use fill
Yeah.
to elevate your
That's
house.
a new one, yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So I think the combination of the two will help.
okay, good. Anybody else?
The issue for all of this, as we well know, is going to come down to enforcement. And whether or not the powers that be are willing to do it across the board. That's gonna be your problem. It's been the problem in the past,
Yeah.
but it will be a massive problem as we rebuild, because I can already see what's gonna happen. I already hear rumblings of what's happening, and it's not what you think it's supposed to be.
Our building department's just gonna have to identify them and hope citizens identify them, any they've missed, turn it in and get it done. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your help on that. Is your intent to, rewrite this, bring it back for us to take another look?
I'll have to, I don't know, I'm just filling in for Tanya,
I know,
so I'm not sure what her thought was. I do have the impression she didn't think this was the final version, so, yeah, I don't know what we need to do.
Is this on the agenda for the next council meeting?
No.
Okay.
Not yet, I haven't done that agenda yet, so.
okay, but that would be the next step,
Yeah,
once we look at it, and then goes to council for their,
Yeah, and it's gonna be an ordinance, you're gonna see it at least another time, I would think.
okay.
Related to your code enforcement discussions, this report that the city published on the website a couple of weeks ago says that code enforcement begins today.
Mm-hmm.
Was that,
Yeah.
is that in effect now?
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Were you applying as a part-time enforcer?
No, I just looked at the website.
They're gonna need some help. Okay? Thank you very much. Anybody have anything else? Anything miscellaneous?
I have something, okay, in keeping with my philosophy on term limits, I hereby resign from the board. However, I will request, when I see Tanya, that, I be put on as an alternate at the earliest opportunity, so I still could say something, just don't have a vote.
Okay, well, that's your prerogative. We would love for you to stay on, but we understand there's other things in life to do rather than planning.
That's not the rationale, I can't preach term limits and not limit myself.
Okay. Do you wish that the presidential term limit would be changed?
No.
Oh, okay. Just didn't know what your philosophy
So my
was.
philosophy is that everybody that's appointed in government
I meant
position should
President of
have
the
one
United
term of
States.
6 years, and that's
Okay, great. Well, you've been a great asset, Jim, and as an alternate, we know we can lean on you to continue to do that, so.
Pressure's on more, pressure's on.
For what?
You're the first alternate,
You're up for
so
promotion.
you would roll in. Okay?
Jim. Talk to you after this.
Adrian, do you have anything from the city you want to update us on, or
I don't know,
what's happening?
And when are they gonna get a new gas station here?
Yeah,
wish I had an answer.
when are they gonna open up the canal?
when we're gonna have a grocery
I'd
store.
rather have a gas station than a canal.
Canal?
That canal over there,
You're
the
about
fish
answering
are out
the
there
canal,
calling.
aren't
So
you?
there
You're about
are-
answering the canal.
Huh?
Canal is supposed to be April
They're
1st.
calling you?
It's not
It was
going to-
still filled in the other day when I was out there.
What would be your
And they're working
preference?
24 hours a
Yes,
day.
both
Yeah.
sides.
One or two.
Okay.
Oh, the
Dredging,
canal one
dredging,
is, but
yeah.
flips.
Anybody else have anything? Thank everybody for coming. You have anything, just an observation? Okay, good. All right, can we have a motion?
I make a motion, Major.
Second.
Okay, motion's second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.